Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Get Printing. I'm your host, Zach Dewhurst, the Business Development Manager at DecoNetwork. I also happen to be a shop owner myself. I started my business Print Phase all the way back in 2009 that revolves around screen print and DTF heat transfers. And all my time in the custom decoration industry, I have learned that there's a lot of different types of equipment out there, and each piece of equipment or decoration method comes with additional bells and whistles if you want to pay for it. When it comes to embroidery, we're seeing more and more machines become essentially smart. They have auto thread tensioning. They have auto adjustments when it comes to the presser foot height. So today we're really thrilled to have Rene Rosales, the Marketing and Education Manager at Texmac, who is the largest dealer of Happy Japan embroidery equipment in the United States. Texmac has been selling Happy Japan embroidery equipment since the 1980s. So they've seen a lot of changes through the years when it comes to embroidery equipment. And really, in the past several decades, not much has changed until really over the past 5 years. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Rene is here to share his valuable insights into why automated embroidery equipment is worth the extra cost. You're going to pay a little bit more, you get what you pay for. A fun fact about Rene, he is an educator when it comes to all things embroidery, and he actually used to teach mixology, essentially bartending. So Rene can teach you how to embroider and how to mix a pretty good cocktail. But before we dive into today's topic, it's important that we recognize our sponsor, DecoNetwork, the all-in-one shop management software built for custom decoration businesses. With DecoNetwork, you can effortlessly organize production, integrate with suppliers, manage orders, and sell online from one platform. No more needing to pay for multiple software subscriptions to manage your decoration business. DecoNetwork streamlines workflow to order management to shipping, while also providing you powerful e-commerce capabilities that allows you to create a beautiful website using the drag and drop what you see, what you get editor. Now, it's time to take your business to the next level. Visit deconetwork.com and request your free demo today. DecoNetwork, the print shop automation software to organize production and sell online. Now, let's get back to the show. How's it going, Rene?
Hey, Zach. Good to see you. Doing just fine here over at Texmac Happy Japan embroidery machines.
Awesome. We run into each other at every trade show.
Yes,
Love stopping by the Texmac booth, talking about Happy Japan equipment. And today's episode is really all about the different types of embroidery machines out there, how to select the right one, and how these machines have evolved over the years. You know, when we look at digital printing equipment, obviously that's progressing very quickly. When DTG came out 15, 20 years ago, quickly progressed. Same with DTF. Your oldest decoration processes, and they're really your analog for the most part, is screen printing and embroidery. And these have been around for a long time. And, when you're just getting into the industry, you don't really know what type of equipment necessarily to buy. You also wonder, how quickly is this going to depreciate? What is the expected lifespan? How much has this changed? Is it like a computer that I buy and 5 years later, there's one that's even cheaper and even better? So let's start with, in your experience, the evolution of embroidery. When did these machines really start popping up so that we could sew a left chest or a hat, designed for a customer?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the answer is a lot longer than you would think. These machines these kinds of machines, multi-needle machines, have been around since the latter half of the 20th century, 60s, 70s, 80s, and of course it was a limited. There wasn't a lot of volume out there. It was a closed industry. And of course, just like anything, any equipment, it's evolved a long way. So they have been out for quite a few years. We got into the game in the mid 80s when it was really starting to revolutionize. And around that time, the widespread availability of multi-needle machines really just kind of started to explode. A couple of brands out there that you know very well really took off with the lion's share of the market. And what's come out is that, you know, what's come out today is that there's just a huge variety of brands out there stemming from that. And of course, there's been many changes, many evolutionary paths that have made it better for embroiderers that are wanting to buy a machine today. But it's been around for quite a few decades, getting right back to your question.
So one thing that's obviously changed is, we're getting bigger screens and everything's becoming essentially
Right.
touch and so forth. So that's obviously, changed some things in the user interface from an embroiderer standpoint who's running the machine. But as far as the actual, basics of embroidery, at the end of the day, we're taking a needle with thread and we're sewing it onto the product. That really hasn't changed much over the years. What has changed, correct me if I'm wrong, is just, again, the, speed at which we can sew. I
Yes.
have to think you're sewing a lot faster than we were back then. We have more colors available on the machine. And one thing that I, didn't think about as much when I was first getting into embroidery, I watched another shop do it, and I really saw it as, okay, you hoop it, you put it on the machine, you walk away, and the machine does all the work. There's a lot of variables to get right in there. And some of those variables are on the machine, some of them are off of the machine. So when you talk about like the evolution of embroidery, let's talk about off the machine, because I see it all the time now with DTF. With DTF, I'm seeing more and more printers with additional colors than CMYK. But at the end of the day, you have to have the RIP software behind the scenes to actually use those colors properly. In embroidery, digitizing is huge. We have to get the file ready so we know, the machine knows where and how many stitches to lay onto the product. And that, I have to think, has really evolved over the past 3 decades plus, compared to when Texmac was first starting to deal these Happy Japan embroidery machines. How much have you seen digitizing change? And gosh, I'll tell you, there's nothing more annoying than getting 5 different digitizers contacting you every single day, Rene, saying they can do it.
Right.
But, it's amazing how cheap and easy it is to get something digitized today compared to 15 years ago when I was just getting into this industry.
Well, that's a really good point, and it definitely has come a long way. So I'm going to give you 2 parallel answers, which is it has come a long way. The way I teach digitizing class today is completely, and the way I try to steer our customers' expectations and how to look at digitizing and incorporating that into their business is different than when I did about in 1997 when I started teaching. So the big thing is right back to you, is what you mentioned is cost. In the 1990s when I was teaching, you couldn't get a left chest design like this for the going rate was $10 per thousand. So if this is a 3,000 stitch design, just text and a little bit, we're looking at $30. And then we're also looking at minimum 2-week turnaround time. So so maybe a 40,000 stitch design or a 10,000 stitch design is $100, and you can easily get 10,000 stitches in a left chest. So let alone a full-size jacket back or anything that's even significantly larger than this. So the costs were higher. The turnaround was a lot slower. So when I had people in my classroom, digitizing class was 3 days long. I spent a day on fundamentals and lettering, a day on editing, and a day on digitizing. And everybody paid attention. They listened to every word that me and my company shared with them, because it was gold, because they were saving a lot of money. And now, just like you and me probably just talking right now, there are probably digitizers out there all around the world that are keying in on our addresses and IPs and going to spam us with, you know, oh,
They
I'll do this
can.
for $3 and we'll do it in 2 hours. And there are a lot of, there are a lot of hacks out there that really say they can, but they can't. But out of them, there's some really good ones that really produce fast turnaround time, good quality, and that's really changed the game. And it's made it a lot easier for you to be an embroiderer today, as long as you can hook up with those good digitizers who are reasonably in cost and very fast in turnaround without, an expedite rate to get this done.
Yeah, like 15 years ago, I think I was averaging like $75 for a
Right.
digitized design. Like you said, several days to get it. And now it's like 24, 48 hours. I could pay to get it faster. I'm around $17. You get what you pay for. I'm a
Right.
big fan. I know you're a big fan. Almost everybody that I talk to uses Vitor digitizing. Shout
Right.
out, Vitor does great work. But when it comes to digitizing, so, we go to these trade shows, we see all these beautiful equipment, and they're all sewing beautifully. But guess what? I don't care if you have the best equipment, but then poor digitizing, they aren't going to work well together. And, if you have really good digitizing, but the variables on the machine aren't what they should be, you're not going to get the best results. We have different needle sizes, we have different types of needles, we have different types of thread. And then in between there, we have thread tension, we have presser foot height. There's a lot of things that have to work together. And a big tip I would share, if you're working with a good digitizer, they're asking you several things. Are we going on a hat? Are we going on a flat? Those two things,
Right.
that's the first question. The things are
Right.
digitized differently. On a hat, we go center out. And
Right.
if it's a 6-panel hat and I've got a big seam down the middle, typically I want to start that off to the left or the right. So the
Right.
first thing that, these are
You know it.
questions that your digitizer has to be asking. Are we going on a piqué? Are we going on a very thin polo? There's just a lot, and then we're talking about backing and topping, and it becomes a little bit overwhelming if you're new into the game. I just recently had a podcast conversation with Madeira on how to choose the right type of backing for jobs. And they have an incredible amount of different types of backing. There is one, they're no mesh show. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's kind of like the newer technology. And if you want to simplify this, use this. It's a little bit more expensive, but the quality is very good and it sews very well. So, how long do you think it takes to really, if you're brand new to this decoration process, you're brand new to embroidery, how long, when you're talking to somebody who comes to the booth and they tell you that, does it take to get really comfortable in sewing well if you're using the resources out there? What do you think that learning curve is like to be competently putting out a good product if you're using the right equipment, obviously?
Well, of course, all those factors come into play. Getting good quality equipment is a big thing. I would say I've been training literally in this room that I'm sitting here for the last 20 years, and I think about how I've taught and how changed how I talk to people that are getting into it new. And I've kind of simplified my approach for the average user that is kind of coming into it cold, and they've invested some money in their equipment, and they want to make sure they do it justice, and of course ultimately make money. And I don't want to scare anybody away. This can be a pretty deep rabbit hole, quite a few rabbit holes to go down. But part of my speech when people walk into this room and they're learning about embroidery for the first time is that I bias my teaching for the new operators, and I tell them that we're going to take an approach when you put a garment on a machine. I'm going to be tell them the shortest path to being able to push the start button, have it sew out, and produce good quality embroidery. And you can simplify things because there are a lot of those factors that you just mentioned, tension, choosing the right stabilizer, needles, threads, where I kind of compare it to tires. When I was growing up in the 70s, if it snowed a little bit, you changed to snow tires. Just tires weren't nearly as good. They're racing tires and all that stuff. Today, you buy a car off the lot, and they've got these general purpose tires that are actually pretty good in a wide variety of conditions. For example, the 7511 sharp needle and 40 weight thread. And if you have a good quality thread like Madeira, and there are quite a few other brands. We sell Rapos, Madeira, and there's definitely a few others out there too that produce really well, and you stay within that zone. And then also the tension setup on a machine. One thing I tell people is tension's a ballpark, not a bullseye. Yes, there are definitely projects, types of items that will really need more precise tension with up or down, either way. But when you're talking the majority garments, like hoodies, shirts, ball caps, as much as I try to preach the fundamentals about needing certain needles for example, sharp points for wovens, ball points for knits, cutaway for garments, and all these good maxims from dealing with my customers and their experience, and also my experience as an embroiderer. There's that shotgun approach to the majority of garments as a startup. You can start with those, and as you build and learn the controls for your machine, learn the rhythm of your order and how to run the machine, then you can build a little bit of bandwidth to diversify into maybe products that may need a little bit more attention than that. So you can get started, right back to your question, and I'll leave it here, is that you can get started operating a machine with a day's training, and then just kind of scale up at your pace, learning for some of the maybe the odder types of jobs, or you're building more room to be able to handle a wider variety of jobs just by starting out with the fundamentals.
Okay. And one thing that I've always done in our shop, and I think most shops do this, is if we're sewing a design for the first time, we're going to do a test sew. And that way, when we embroider a product, it's typically on a polo, a hat. It's something that is 2 to 10 times more expensive than a t-shirt, or a lot more. So when we go to sew it, I want to make sure it's good. And the consumable costs are so minimal with embroidery. I think, for those who don't know, I mean, you're talking, 50 cents less, Rene, for most
Yes.
embroidery. I mean, it's
That's
so
about right.
minimal, but it's the machine time. And let's talk about the machine time, because when you buy a machine, obviously there's only there's X amount of pieces in a day it can sew, because depending on the detail and size of the design, it could take, it could take 2 minutes. It could take hours to sew the design. So let's talk about tension, because you just brought it up. So thread tension, one, it sounds like it's not really going to necessarily hurt the quality of the embroidery. Is that correct?
Right, as long as, like I said, you're in ballpark. You can't ignore tension for sure. So, but I've walked into shops and tested their tension, and I said, you guys are really light and on tension. But I look at their products that are on the racks or in the boxes ready to go, and it looks great. And there are people who run on the tighter side. But basically, when you're within a certain range, you're fine. And then the other thing, of course, that's helping that is if you have a good quality machine, they're going to hold tension for years and years and years. I've got a 2005 in my house. My wife operates the machine, and we rarely touch the tensions. And I run into that with visiting customers on site. As long as you're within that range, you can accomplish a lot of embroidery, good quality embroidery on a wide variety of garments, as long as you kind of keep in that range. So that's that answer addressing that question directly.
How I got into embroidery, my first machine, because I was just on a budget and so forth, I bought a Brother PR 1050 Entrepreneur Pro. And a lot of people will tell you that's not an industrial machine. That's a home-based machine. I tell you, I've really liked it. It was a great way for me to learn and get in. You know, you're talking about a $12,000 single head machine. What I've ran into it though, Rene, is the tension is a lot harder over those years to be able to like dial it in. Versus a machine like yours behind you is what I typically see the setup where we have all the tension right there on the front. So let's talk about tension though, because for those who don't know, you have your spools of thread above the machine, and then underneath you have a bobbin, just like what normal sewing. Right. So it's a battle between top tension and bottom tension. And when that's not right, Rene, we're going to be breaking thread, right? And what that means is the machine has now stopped. And every time it stops, somebody has to walk across the room, fix it, and go. And the fewer times we have to do that in the day, the better. So what tension is supposed to be higher than the other? And how do we see it? You know, I know when I look on the inside part of a garment, I'm supposed to be seeing so much thread color from the top and so much coming from the bottom. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about how to get that right tension and what we should be seeing.
Well, I speak primarily, of course, from my brand, Happy Japan, but they're very similar to the other brands out there, Japanese brands, German, and even some of those, the other brands that are coming in the market from other countries as well. Your top tension is going to be higher than the bobbin tension. And for what I've seen, not just for, well, I'll put it in perspective. I had a Brother PR600 here for a couple of months, sewed with it. I actually thought it was a great machine, good quality. I think you can take a wide variety of machines, just stepping outside of my job for a moment, and you can take a wide variety of brands of machines, and as long as you're following the directions and the machine is behaving according to how it was designed, you can get a great quality sew out. And it comes down to tension. And everybody differs a little bit. I found the same with a Brother is that you have definitely much tighter upper tension versus the bobbin tension. With a Brother, I was looking at maybe 3 to 4 times higher upper tension than the lower bobbin tension. With the Happy machines, I'm looking more like about 4 to 5 more times upper tension to the lower tension. So, and I get a lot of people who say they'll put a gauge on there. They'll spend a couple $100 with measuring devices, which is really good for precision, repeatability. But I've always preached people that are minimalists. I'm a minimalist myself. When you're pulling on the thread to test it, doing your bobbin drop tests, things like that, that result in, the certain ballpark results that you're looking for, that as long as you keep that ratio, then you're going to get good quality sew outs. Like you said, abuse that ratio where you're not 3 to 4 more times tighter than the bottom, but maybe 1 to 1, then you're getting into trouble. So as long as you maintain that ratio, you have good, consistent quality product coming out of your machine.
And again, if you look at the inside part of embroidery that was sewn, let's say we're doing a solid line, and in the middle I should see the bobbin tension. How much of that line should I see the bobbin thread?
Well, ideally, I had a handy sample here. I grab it. But basically, like you said, flip the embroidery over, take this and flip it over. You're looking at mostly your lettering, what's called a satin stitch, where any area where the embroidery coverage is sewn left, right, and you've got a row of stitching back and forth. Flip that over, and you've got an edge of the color on both sides, and then running down the middle, a stripe of that bobbin. There you go. Okay, so that works perfectly. So you see those two zigzag on the side represent the edges of the color that are on the top if you're looking on the reverse side. And in the middle, you have the bobbin. Ideally, you're looking at 25 to 33%, one third, one third, one third, one third of color, one third bobbin, whatever color that is, and one third of the upper color on the opposite side. Ideally, that's what you're shooting for. I found that as long as you see a stripe and you're somewhere between, 10% to 33%, generally you're not going to see any looping on the top of your garment. Obviously, it's better if you were at that 33%. But yeah, looking for that stripe and approximately there, that's a good assurance that that you're not going to have any problems with your machine and your quality.
So talk about, okay, you just brought up a great point. So like looping. So like, what are you going to typically see when your tension is not where it needs to be? Let's say I'm having 5% of that bobbin thread showing, right? What am I going to see in the embroidery? Is it hurting the durability, or am I bird nesting potentially? What is going to go wrong when I don't have good tension?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, again, I see a lot of embroidery where the tensions are off on the machine. It's different brands, I think, and that's more of an operator thing. It's not one machine is better than the other. And it looks great on the front, but you flip it over on the back and you'll see that stripe may be off. So I used to scratch my head on that one, like, well, it's not where it's supposed to be, and yet it looks great. So getting back to bringing that right to your question is that you can have good looking embroidery without the tensions being too far off, which is getting back to me saying there's a ballpark. You can be in.
Hey,
okay.
I like this. Okay. You're simplifying it. You're right. Ballpark is easier to hit than that bullseye for sure.
Right. Yeah, it's a ballpark, not a bullseye, but you got to stay within the ballpark. But what you run into is that if you're sewing on a garment, there are still going to be variations in the conditions when you're going across a garment. You've got to think about going down the rabbit hole that I ask embroiderers to do is that, okay, well, here's text, but here's a color on top of another color. So it's going to take a little bit more tension to close the loops when you're going through more layers than you would on other parts of the garment. What if I'm sewing on top of a garment going across and I'm going across a seam or a yoke, like you said, at the center seam on a hat? There are going to be demands over those few stitches where if your tension's not good enough, you're going to get looping. So my answer based on experience and helping people is that you go more precisely within that ballpark. It gives you more padding on either side, too light, too if you're too heavy, that protects you from going over seams or other conditions where you need a little extra tension. But you're not so heavy that if you are on a lighter garment like a dry fit, that you're not going to pucker unnecessarily. So staying within that middle protects you against those varying conditions. Like you said, looping, it may sew along great, but then you see a couple of loops. Well, look at that section. Did you go over a heavier item? Heavier part of the garment? Are there intersecting layers of embroidery there that will generally cause something like that? So being more precise with your tension protects you and just gives you better assurance that over a wide variety of conditions you won't get
less
moving.
Having to snip after the job is done.
Right, exactly.
And every time you've got to snip something, you're taking a nice sharp point, and you are potentially going to rip the garment the more you have to get in there.
Leave a tail or something, right.
So, and then if the tension is too high on top, that's when we're breaking thread, correct?
Well, I used to think that, but I've also worked with a lot of quilters who use these machines, and they'll use Madeira thread for their quilting, and where they've got their machine set up 5-to-1 on the quilting, or let's say 125 grams. If you put it on a gauge, when they're on their quilting machines going through layers of batting and everything, they're running at 170, 180 grams tension, and they're not getting any thread breaks. And again, that's not saying that speaking to any particular brand machine. If today's modern polyester thread can put up with a higher peak tensions than you
Okay.
would think. So yes, I think lesser thread or challenging conditions, it will increase the chance of thread breaks, but you can run tighter tensions. The question is, there are plenty of reasons not to run unnecessarily tight tensions, especially on, for example, lighter garments. You want to minimize the puckering on dry fit garments as one of the more popular prevalent examples.
I'm glad you brought up just the thread is getting better.
Yeah.
So the consumables, the thread, and the backing have definitely improved. Just like screen printing, the ink
Yes.
that we use today is totally different than 30, 40 years ago, which was just a lot harder to work with, and you had to do certain things. So thread tension. Now what I'm starting to see when I go to the shows and so forth is machines that have auto tension.
Right.
And this is very new. I mean, to me, this is like the biggest new thing that I've seen in my 15 years, other than just the screens getting bigger and so forth. So would you agree that the auto tensioning is one of the bigger enhancements to the machines in the past 15 years?
Yes, absolutely. In the last 15 years or so, our machines have come a long way. I've seen a lot of evolutionary changes, but I'm sitting right here in this spot because of the topic that you picked out, which is really a hot thing in the market. I'm sitting between two machines that are of two different mindsets. We've got our traditional upper and lower tensioners here that are turned by hand. They're maintained by the operator, and versus our HCU unit here, where it's controlled digitally, and it really does take a lot of the thinking out of it. And it's definitely we're selling quite a few of these to people that really like that feature, and we've had a lot of success with it. So it's a big change. It's definitely the biggest change. As well as digital pressure foot sensing, garment thicknesses. These digital technologies are coming on, and I don't think whether it's Happy Japan or other brands would have invested that much money into developing and refining them to the point they are unless they had a real advantage for the embroiderer. And we are definitely seeing that, and it's definitely getting a lot of interest from our client base.
And how new is this technology?
Well, we've had our digital tension machine since about 2019, and so it's in its second generation. So it's refined. It's even better, and the first generation's fine, but we like the second generation. It's even easier to work with. So it's been out there for a few years. I'm not sure about our competitors where they are. I know that they've been working on that about the same time, maybe. Roughly in the same time frame.
Okay. I like to kind of look at this technology as if it's a smart embroidery machine, because it kind of is, right? I mean, so this is what I really want to dive into now, Rene, is just like we kind of have the old school dialing in the tension and adjusting the presser foot height based on the material thickness. Now, with this newer technology, how does the auto tension work? And what are the big pros to that? Because it does cost a little bit more.
Yes, it definitely does. You pay to get your bells and whistles. So basically how it works with our machine here, so this is our HCU2 15 needle machine, and servo driven. You've got our digital tensioners up here, a digital presser feed. But basically with the digital tension, it's monitored and operated electromechanically. The computer senses the tension on there, and motors digitally will adjust to maintain that force on there. So if a customer wants a certain level of tension, they tell it that amount of tension, and the machine will maintain that automatically so that they don't have to think about it. And the beauty of that is, since it's digital, you can store that as data inside the machine, And then the machine can remember tension setups for you. So if I'm running standard garments on one set of jobs, I can refer to another setting. If I want to run silk, or if I want to run, I don't know, something heavy like a Richardson hat with 3D puff or something like that. So it's automatically adjusting for that by you just kind of telling it, and that way there's no guesswork in turning knobs. So it changes, it simplifies the teaching for operators that are going into this who already have a lot to learn. So that kind of lightens the load as far as the learning curve.
I mean, it makes sense. So if you want to kind of decrease that learning curve into embroidery, you can buy a machine with some better bells and whistles,
Yep.
just like most products or, piece of equipment in any industry. You get what you pay for. When it comes to, you just brought up like the Richardson 112. So when I'm at trade shows, you guys are always going on a Richardson 112. By far the most popular hat in the industry, not the most fun thing to sew. But when I walk by your guys' booth at Texmac, I've yet to see, Happy Japan breaking a thread or do anything. That thing just pumps out. But let's talk about, because like with hats, gosh, everybody wants something three-dimensional. It's not that easy necessarily unless you have good tension, right? I mean, this is something that is very important when you're trying to do that thicker hat and you want that three-dimensional puff look. Tension is very much so a factor, right?
Yes, you're kind of playing a game. You're walking a narrower ledge with tension. For new embroiderers, at least in our experience with the Happy Japan machines, I tell people to leave the tension alone. And the machines are fine out of the box. One thing that you're seeing at the shows is that over here we've got our compact 12 needle machine, and it's sewing away high speed 3D puff on the Richardson 112 hats. So, and we use that as a bragging point and say, just about any one of our models can sew that. But honestly, if you have good setup, you should be okay and be able to operate commercially, as in minimal intervention, maximum production, as long as you have a good standard setup. But getting back to your point, is that as you get more experience and you want to really refine your technique on, for example, 3D puff, Richardson 112s, a regular setup, regular tension setup, you can go too tight or too loose, and of course, again, like I said, you're walking a narrower ledge when you're doing specialty projects like 3D puff. If you loosen your tension a little bit, then the thread that's trapping that foam isn't holding it down so much, so you get a little bit more loft in your 3D puff, which is what you want to have is 3D height to just give some dimensionality to your design. But you go too light and you'll bird nest. So the standard tension setup keeps my new operators safe from having to do that. And over time, I say, okay, you're pumping out really good garments, but now you've got customers that want a little more height, use taller foam. Sure, go ahead. Now that you're familiar with tension, you can operate a little bit lighter if you want to, and get that edge. So you have a little bit of flexibility there. So there's a simple approach, and then if you want to really refine your technique and get a little more cutting edge as far as what you can do as an embroiderer, then you can start getting into those finer techniques with tension, for example.
So, like, you have the newer technology right behind you right now. The older technology, should that machine often be serviced more often by a tech, or is it that you just should be kind of reading your tension over time? Because, like anything, things run slower, or if I have bulbs in a dryer, they're not going to heat up the same way from day one compared to year 3. Things just start wearing down. So how often should a machine, it's probably not necessarily time, it's more of the amount of stitches that have been laid down and so forth. But how often should somebody be looking at tension, or is it more of when the artwork is telling you that it's not sewing as well, that's when I know, hey, we need to look at this?
Well, that's a good point. You want to stay on top of your machine's, lack of a better word, settings, whether it's whatever you got set up in the control panel, how it's mechanically set up, and of course, right back to you, what you said, the tension. So you want to be proactive. You don't want to be you don't want to discover it in the middle of a run and realize that you've got to trash, 2 or 3% of your output because you discovered that it really wasn't sewing well and it ruined something. But of course, at the same time, you're balancing that with being minimalist. Back to what we said at the beginning, you want minimal intervention because it's machine time that really eats into your profit. So you don't want to be stopped constantly and checking, measuring, cleaning. So the reality of these good quality machines is that they should maintain their tension, even in less than ideal environments. I've walked into shops that are immaculate because they're in their home. They have air purifiers. The surface of the machines look almost as clean as when they were unboxed. But I've also walked into factories where there's layers of dust on everything except for what they're touching. And you don't want that. But one thing I preach is that you shouldn't have to adjust your tension every day, but especially if you're running your thread every day. If I'm running the same project, let's say we're running 2,000 American flags. We did the first 1,000 yesterday, doing the second 1,000 today. Come in, you're the last person to touch your machine. Fine, you can hit start. You don't have to worry about it. Keep it running. The thread flowing through the machine, actually what I call flosses out any dust or interference, and it maintains for a while. I mean, good quality springs, wheels, dials, and everything will turn thousands of times over their lifetime, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. My 2005 machine at home maintains tension just as well as these 2024 machines, but keep it clean. And then one thing I preach is that if you have not touched the thread, my tip to any new embroiderer, if you've not sewn this thread, this color for a long time, or this is the first time you do it, you've used it, pull it through and feel it. Make sure your wheels are turning, test and release your tensioners, make sure they're functioning. Take a few seconds with each color, and that helps assure that first stitch coming out of there is going to look just as good as the millionth stitch coming out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think you just brought up a point, and I don't know if this is still as much true, but different colors have a little bit different tension to them. So, white may sew a little differently than black. So even though it's still the poly neon 40, it know that some colors are different, and this goes again back to the auto technology and how it's a smart machine and it's reducing the user potential error. Right. So the big technology, again, automatic thread tensioning, really cool there. And talk to us about the presser foot height and why that is important. And if you don't have the right presser foot height, what does that lead to? Issues?
Okay, well, that's a great question. And Zach, just to let you know, I'm running a little low on battery. So if there's a point where I can plug this thing in, just to warn you in case I do die off, just to let you know preemptively. So now, to answer your question about presser foot and the importance, so the presser foot's job in the embroidery stroke or cycle, the sewing cycle, your needle is coming down, but you have a foot that's coming down and it's pressing down on the garment, holding it in place. And they don't come down together. If you watch in slow motion, a good machine, the stroke is the foot comes down first and bottoms out, and the needle's coming down too, but then it comes through and starts to come back up, but the presser foot doesn't move. So at first, and then the needle comes up, then the presser foot comes. So its job is to hold the garment down as the needle's coming up and the hook is kind of making that stitch and locking it in and closing it up. So if the foot comes up or if it's not there, then the hook has a harder time closing in that stitch. So it's important that foot stays low, and not only that, but it has to stay within a certain distance. You have the top of your needle plate, you have your backing, your garment, and then your presser foot. So that presser foot's got to hold those together in a sandwich for that time that the needle's coming up and it's making that stitch. So if you hit the presser foot, that happens. You're in an industrial environment. You have new operators. People make mistakes. I've bent presser feet this year, as much as I've been doing it. And so maybe it's kinked up and it's a little higher than it should be, or you hit a hoop. Then it can no longer do that, and you're going to get looping, as an example. So, and then, of course, most machines, getting back to it, whether you have a traditional setup or a digital tension are defaulting to about 1.2 millimeters above the plate. That lets you create that sandwich. But as you go through thicker garments, with a traditional setup, the presser foot at the bottom, if I go through something thicker, the presser foot's spring-loaded to allow for varying thicknesses. So that's good, so you don't have to make any adjustments for a traditional setup. But with a more modern digital presser foot system, as it rides over, let's say it's sewing along, and then it detects a change in height, that first stroke, you've got a sensor here that's detecting that I've got a greater thickness, and it'll automatically raise that foot a little bit higher. So it may be goose stepping a little bit. And what that does is, even though my more traditional machine over here is going to spring up a little bit to adjust for that, with your digital tension setup, then it's raising up, so you have consistent pressure here and consistent pressure here. So you have more consistent embroidery and less chance of looping. So that's where this has an advantage as you're going over unknown or much more challenging substrates.
Okay, no, you explained that perfectly. So if you're
a little bit detailed, right?
If you've been embroidering for 10 plus years,
right?
Are they going with the newer technology? Are they typically paying a little bit more, or is this more of your, hey, I'm new to embroidery, I'm trying to make it simpler on myself, give me the bells and whistles? What have you seen?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I've found myself convinced that this is the way. And then I've found myself convinced that the traditional setup is going to be around for a long, long, long time. And so with the digital tension setup, looking at today's conditions, labor conditions, we're at a point in time in this
you can't get anybody to work.
Where, I'm sorry?
You can't get anybody to work.
Right, exactly.
We're
so employed that it's hard to get good quality people. So with the digital tension setups, we have big plant operators who really are interested in this machine, because even though they're paying a premium for it, it's lowering their the bar for the learning curve, so that they can get people working faster, or maybe not have to tap into people who are willing to go as far down the rabbit hole as far as the skill sets go. So it's very attractive. We have people that will only buy these machines just because of that. But at the same time, with our traditional brands out there that are focused on quality, construction, durability, we're a mid-priced machine, and you get a great longevity, durability, quality out of that. But there's the low end where there are brands out there that are selling purely on price. And there's a good back and forth between quality, value versus just bottom line price. And the reality is that there are a lot of businesses out there that are still shopping for that. So being able to offer, a couple of different solutions that will allow business owners to make a decision based on what their conditions are, whether labor and quality of labor is a primary factor, repeatability, ease of training versus being able to get up and running. They've got a good skill set. They don't have a high turnover rate. They've got good people, where the traditional tension setup has worked for decades. Me personally, I've got some skills, having hopefully had some skills after being in the industry almost 30 years. So I have no problem operating this. But if I were to hire a lot of employees and I had to pick from a wide variety of skill sets, then I would start considering this. So I think it's nice to have. I think both types of machines will be out there in the market for a while.
Okay. And everything from a single head to a 12 head,
Right,
like
right.
you can I sew faster when I have this digital capability?
Well, I know one of the things that people are getting into now is that these machines are. Zach, I'm going to have to plug in here, so
Okay. You
bear
good.
with me. So, is that okay? Are
Yep.
we
No,
on
yeah.
live?
Colin will work his magic.
Oh, okay. All right, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So,
why we have Colin. I just give it to him and make him make it look pretty.
all right. Okay, give me just a
Yep.
few
You're good.
seconds. I'll
You're
be
good.
right back. Let me plug in. All right. Okay, we're good. Okay, I'm back.
No, very good. So I'm going to re-ask that question and really only have like one more after that. So, Rene, with this digital technology, can I sew faster? Can I lay more down stitches per minute?
I would, honestly, I haven't seen any difference speed wise, but with these newer machines, they're coming with servo motors, so the servos enable you to run faster, more smoothly. So, for example, this machine runs 1,500 stitches a minute, and with the digital presser for the digital tension, we really don't have any problems running at 1,500
1,500 is
stitches a minute.
higher. I mean, that's
Right.
20% higher. I most machines I see at the shows, they'll market 1,200 stitches a minute.
Right. Right.
But they're also at the shows. They like to slow them down a little.
Right.
Hey, you don't want to. I mean, think about a car engine. If you're constantly on the gas at 80 miles an hour versus if you
Right.
start cruising at 65, which is the actual speed limit,
Mm-hmm.
you'll be better off. So, yeah, do you like most machines nowadays 900 to 1,200 stitches per
Right.
minute? Is that about
That's
fair?
fair.
And
Yep.
if you're getting if you're getting like the industrial machine, it's like when I bought my brother, and again, for the money to get started, I'm not putting it down at all.
Right.
But
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have to stitch a hat at like half the amount of stitches per minute. And then if I put it on, one of my other machines that's not brother, it's going to be sewing twice as fast most of the time because
Right.
it's
Right.
an industrial machine. So, but 1,500, that's still good. As long as the thread is not breaking, because that's funny because again, at these shows, oh, look, it can do 2,000 stitches per minute. It's breaking every other minute. It's not. How many stitches are actually being laid in an hour is actually less than 900 because you've got somebody over there rethreading it all the time.
Absolutely.
So yeah, always keep that in mind. Is it easier to thread at all? Do you think that it?
Yeah, they're getting easier to thread. I don't have two knobs to thread. I've got one digital device and then a thread break detector, and then happy as I'm sure others are simplifying the thread path, so I don't have to thread little loops and check springs and everything the way you run it naturally. It's become a lot easier to thread versus our older generation machines.
Do you
So-
ever suggest if I have to take off the one spool and put on another, tying a knot
Hmm.
up top and then running it all the way through?
Absolutely, that's how we do it here.
Okay,
So yeah, so if I want to change one of these cones up here, just tie a knot, pull it through, no problem.
cool. In our industry, though, Rene, you have mom and pops, you have larger companies and so forth. But what has the demand and the reception been to this technology? Has it been different than you thought?
I think the factors that we've been talking about are all in play when we have this discussion. We have price point on one. We always have. There's always going to be people that are shopping on price. I'm a new embroiderer. I can't afford much. I'd like the cheapest solution. But on the other side, we have people who want to do it right. They want to invest one time and get the best for what they're doing. And there's going to be camps that are on both sides or somewhere in the middle. So being able to operate or to offer both types of solutions keeps us in the discussion, being able to do that. We definitely get a lot of people who like the new technology because either they need it, like you said, it's a need, they're afraid of the labor pool, or they have a very high turnover rate. So it really has a high value for them. And then you also have a certain percentage, maybe the people who bought Tesla when it first came out, for example, they're early adopters. They like to market themselves as being at the cutting edge because of the equipment they use, the technology. And that's where they position the value of their company when selling themselves as their brand and what they do. But there's also, again, the pragmatic side, not to say that this isn't pragmatic, that are more cost conscious, that are just fine with the traditional technology. So we're walking both sides of the ledge and both sides of that fence. And as far as I'm concerned, it's nice to be able to address both sides with a solution for each.
No, it makes sense. It's like, hey, when automatic screen presses started hitting the market, you didn't just stop selling a manual.
Right. They're still out there.
There's always time and place, and there's always budgets. Rene, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your decades of knowledge. Where can our viewers go to learn more about Texmac's Happy Japan line of products? Because you guys are the oldest and largest distributor in North America for this equipment. And again, Happy Japan, hey, if it's manufactured in Japan, I have total confidence in purchasing it.
Absolutely.
Because, hey, I've never bought Japanese engineering and thought, what the heck were they thinking? No, I mean,
Right.
it just, you can't go wrong with Japan. So where can our viewers learn more?
Well, it's very simple. Our machines are Happy Japan embroidery machines. Go to www.happyjapan.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rene, for joining us. And I look forward to having another similar conversation with you in the future. And I'll see you at Printing United.
All right. Always enjoy, Zach. Looking forward to the next time.
Thanks, Rene. You have a good one.
All right. You too, Zach.